My name is Claire Morrison and I'm 58 years old. For the past 2 years, I've been planning my daughter Jessica's wedding down to every last detail. Or at least I thought I was. What I didn't know was that Jessica and my husband Richard had been making their own plans behind my back. Plans that didn't include me at all. The moment I discovered the truth was also the moment I decided to teach them both a lesson they would never forget. It all started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I came home early from my part-time job at the library. I had left work 2 hours ahead of schedule because I wanted to surprise Jessica and go over some final details about the wedding invitations. We had been discussing fonts for weeks and I thought I'd finally found the perfect one. I'd even printed out samples on expensive cardstock to show her the difference between the serif and sans serif options. Looking back now, I can see how pathetic I must have looked, clutching those invitation samples like they were precious artifacts, so eager to please my daughter who had barely shown interest in any of my suggestions. But at the time I was just a mother excited about her daughter's wedding, desperate to be involved, desperate to matter. The library had been quiet that afternoon. It was always quiet on Tuesdays. Mrs. Henderson, my supervisor, had looked at me with kind eyes when I asked to leave early. "Go ahead, Claire," she'd said. "You've been working so hard on this wedding. You deserve to enjoy the planning." If only she'd known that I was the only one treating it like a collaboration. I walked into our house through the back door, shaking off my umbrella. The kitchen was immaculate as always. I'd cleaned it that morning before work, wiped down the counters, loaded the dishwasher, left a note for Richard reminding him about the dry cleaning. I was always leaving notes for Richard. Reminders, suggestions, gentle requests. He rarely acknowledged them. That's when I heard voices coming from the living room. Jessica's voice, clear and sharp and full of energy in a way it never was when she talked to me, and my husband's deeper tone responding to her. I was about to call out to them when I heard my name. "Mom is going to lose her mind when she finds out," Jessica said, laughing. I froze in the hallway, my wet coat still dripping onto the floor. The invitation samples in my hand suddenly felt heavy, like they were made of lead instead of paper. "Mom is going to lose her mind when she finds out," Jessica said, laughing. It was the kind of laugh I'd heard so often from her in recent months. Not the warm, genuine laugh from her childhood, but something sharper, more calculated. The laugh of someone who thought they were smarter than everyone around them. I froze in the hallway, my wet coat still dripping onto the floor. "She'll get over it," Richard replied dismissively. "Look, Jessica, this is your wedding, not hers. Your mother has been treating it like it's her second chance at a perfect ceremony ever since we started planning." "I know, Dad. That's exactly why I want to do it this way. I'm sick of her showing up to every appointment with those horrible ideas. Pink roses everywhere, vintage lace. God, it's like she wants me to look like I'm getting married in 1985. My hands began to tremble. I had spent hours researching those pink roses. I'd driven to 3 different florists to find the perfect shade. I'd brought home samples and laid them out on the dining room table, photographing them in different lights to see which would look best. I'd shown the photos to Jessica, asking her opinion, and she'd said, "They're fine, Mom. Whatever you think." I'd taken that as approval. I'd taken that as us working together. Now I realized it had been dismissal. She'd been patronizing me the whole time. And vintage lace. I'd spent an entire weekend driving to estate sales, looking for the perfect vintage lace to incorporate into the table runners. I'd found a beautiful piece from the 1920s, delicate and intricate, and I'd been so proud of it. I'd imagined telling Jessica the story of where it came from, how it had survived nearly a century and would now be part of her special day. I'd imagined her being touched by the sentiment. Instead, she thought it was a joke. She thought I wanted her to look like she was getting married in 1985. The year of her comment stung particularly hard because 1985 was the year Richard and I got married. Was that another insult? Was she mocking not just my taste but my entire marriage? My hands began to tremble. I had spent hours researching those pink roses. I'd driven to 3 different florists to find the perfect shade. "The important thing is," Richard continued, "that we keep her busy with the fake plans while we finalize everything else. Let her think she's organizing the wedding of the century. Meanwhile, we'll have the actual wedding exactly how you want it." The casual cruelty of his words was breathtaking. Keep me busy, like I was a child who needed to be distracted with a toy while the adults did the real work. How long had he seen me this way? How long had I been just an inconvenience to manage? "But what about the money?" Jessica asked. "She's been putting aside money from her salary for months. Won't she notice when the bills don't match what we're actually spending?" I thought about those months of setting aside money, How I'd cut back on everything to make the wedding budget work. How I'd stopped buying new clothes for myself, had started bringing lunch to work instead of buying it, had canceled my subscription to the book club I loved because the monthly fee seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford when Jessica needed a perfect wedding. I'd put aside money from every single paycheck. Sometimes it was $50, sometimes $200, depending on what else needed to be paid that month. I'd kept a little notebook where I tracked every contribution, adding it up with pride. The notebook was in my purse right now, actually next to the invitation samples. I'd been planning to show it to Jessica today, to prove to her how much I'd saved, to see her face light up with gratitude. Richard laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold. Your mother doesn't check the joint account statements. She just deposits her paycheck every month and assumes I'm handling everything. I've been moving the wedding money into a separate account. She thinks we're spending $40,000 on this wedding when we're really only spending about $15,000. $40,000. That's what we'd agreed on together. Or at least that's what Richard had told me the wedding would cost. I'd believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. He managed our finances. I trusted him. What a fool I'd been. And they were only spending $15,000? That meant $25,000 of my money. Money I'd earned shelving books and helping patrons find their next read and running literacy programs for children. Money I'd saved by denying myself every small pleasure was just gone. Diverted. Stolen. The important thing is, Richard continued, that we keep her busy with the fake plans while we finalize everything else. Let her think she's organizing the wedding of the century. Meanwhile, we'll have the actual wedding exactly how you want it. But what about the money? Jessica asked. She's been putting aside money from her salary for months. Won't she notice when the bills don't match what we're actually spending? Richard laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold. Your mother doesn't check the joint account statements. She just deposits her paycheck every month and assumes I'm handling everything. I've been moving the wedding money into a separate account. She thinks we're spending $40,000 on this wedding when we're really only spending about $15,000. And the difference? Jessica's voice was eager, greedy. Goes to me. Think of it as a fee for putting up with her obsessive wedding planning for 2 years. Besides, with that money I can finally buy that boat I've been wanting. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. My husband was stealing from me. My daughter was complicit. Together, they were turning the happiest moment we were supposed to share into an elaborate con. What about the guest list? Jessica asked. Mom invited like 100 people. I had invited 100 people. People who had been part of my life, part of Jessica's life. My book club friends who had thrown me a baby shower when I was pregnant with Jessica. My colleagues from the library who had watched her grow up, who had recommended books for her at every age, who had celebrated her high school graduation. My old college roommates who had known me before I became Mrs. Morrison, before I became Jessica's mother, when I was just Claire with dreams and ambitions of my own. I'd spent weeks on that guest list, carefully considering each person, who had been there for the important moments, who deserved to celebrate this joy with us. I'd agonized over every name, worried about hurting feelings by leaving someone out. And now I learned that they'd all been invited to a fake wedding, that the invitation in their hands was essentially a lie. Most of them won't be getting real invitations, Richard explained. We'll send them notice about a change of venue, at the last minute to some random address. By the time they figure it out, the actual wedding will be over. That's brilliant, Dad. So it'll just be my friends, some of Mom's relatives so she doesn't get too suspicious, and your side of the family? Exactly. Small, elegant, and nothing like the circus your mother has been planning. No pink roses, no vintage lace, no embarrassing speeches from her book club friends. They both laughed, the sound echoing through my childhood home, the house I had inherited from my parents and foolishly put in both Richard's and my name when we got married. I stood there in that hallway for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. My mind was racing through the past 2 years. Every Saturday spent visiting venues. Every evening addressing envelopes. Every lunch hour spent on the phone with caterers. All of it, every single moment, had been a lie designed to keep me distracted while they planned the real wedding behind my back. But what hurt most was the realization that this wasn't just about the wedding. This was about my entire marriage, my entire relationship with my daughter. How long had they been laughing at me behind my back? How many other times had Richard taken money that I'd earned and spent it on himself? How many other moments had Jessica looked at me with disdain while smiling to my face? I quietly stepped back toward the door, careful not to make a sound. I left the house the same way I'd entered, got into my car and just drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be in that house for another second. I ended up at a coffee shop 3 towns over, a place where nobody knew me. I ordered a black coffee I didn't want and sat in a corner booth, staring at nothing. The coffee shop was called the daily grind, and it was one of those generic chains you find everywhere. Normally I hated places like this, preferring the independent bookstores and cafes I'd always supported. But today I needed anonymity. I needed to be somewhere where I wasn't Claire Morrison, wife and mother. I needed to be nobody. My phone rang 4 times. Richard twice, Jessica twice. I didn't answer. I could imagine what they were saying to each other now. Where did she go? Do you think she heard us? No, she would have said something. She probably just went shopping or something. They thought so little of me that they wouldn't even consider the possibility that I'd discovered their betrayal. They thought I was too stupid, too trusting, too pathetic to figure it out. Instead I started thinking, really thinking for the first time in years. When had I become so invisible in my own life? When had I become someone whose feelings were so unimportant that my own family could orchestrate this level of betrayal without a second thought? I thought about the early years of my marriage. I'd been 28 when I married Richard. He'd been 32, charming and confident in a way that had swept me off my feet. He'd worked in sales back then, always talking about the big deals he was going to close, the success that was just around the corner. I'd believed in him. I'd supported him when his big deals fell through, when he lost jobs, when he decided to go into business with friends who inevitably turned out to be unreliable. I'd worked full-time throughout our marriage, first as a teacher's aide, then as a library assistant, gradually working my way up to my current position as a children's programming coordinator. My career had been steady if unspectacular. I'd never made a lot of money, but it had been reliable income that kept us afloat during Richard's various professional misadventures. When Jessica was born, I'd taken 6 weeks of maternity leave and then gone right back to work. We'd needed the money, and Richard had promised he would step up, find something stable. That had been 27 years ago, and he was still working part-time at his friend's car dealership, still talking about the big opportunities that were just around the corner. I'd never complained. I'd never criticized him for not providing more financially. I just quietly carried the burden of being the reliable one, the stable one, the one who made sure the bills got paid and there was food in the refrigerator. And this was my reward. My phone rang 4 times. Richard twice, Jessica twice. I didn't answer. Instead I started thinking, really thinking for the first time in years. When had I become so invisible in my own life? When had I become someone whose feelings were so unimportant that my own family could orchestrate this level of betrayal without a second thought? I thought about my mother who had passed away 5 years ago. He had never liked Richard. "There's something in his eyes, Claire," she told me once. "Something calculating. Please be careful." I dismissed her concerns as old-fashioned prejudice. My mother had been from a different generation, I told myself. She didn't understand modern relationships, modern men. Now I wished I'd listened. My mother had been a strong woman, a teacher who'd raised 3 daughters mostly on her own after my father died young. She'd valued independence and self-respect. She taught us to never rely entirely on a man for our security or our sense of worth. And yet somehow I'd done exactly that. I'd spent 30 years defining myself by my relationship to Richard and Jessica, forgetting who Claire had been before them. The house I lived in, the one Richard lived in so comfortably, had been my mother's house. She'd left it to me in her will, along with a small amount of savings. I'd put Richard's name on the deed when we'd been married for 10 years. "It's our home," he'd said. "It should be in both our names. It's only fair." It had seemed like the right thing to do at the time, like proof that we were true partners. Now I realized it had just been another way for him to claim what wasn't his. My phone rang again. This time it was my sister, Margaret. I answered. "Claire, thank God. Richard just called me looking for you. He says you left work early and never came home. Are you all right?" Margaret, 3 years older than me, a divorce lawyer with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. She'd been telling me for years that Richard was taking advantage of me, but I'd never wanted to hear it. Sisters don't want to admit that their lives aren't perfect, especially when the older sister seems to have it all figured out. "Maggie," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I need you to answer a question honestly. Do you think I'm a fool?" There was a pause. I could almost hear her choosing her words carefully. "What happened?" I told her everything. Every word I'd overheard, every realization, every moment of humiliation. When I finished, I heard her take a deep breath. "That son of a bitch," she said quietly. "And Jessica too." "Claire, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry," I replied. "Just tell me honestly. Have you noticed? Have people been laughing at me?" "No one's been laughing at you, Claire. You've been a devoted wife and mother. That's not something to laugh at. But, she hesitated. But what? I've always thought Richard was using you. The way he'd talk about our money when you were the one working full-time while he worked part-time at his friend's car dealership. The way he'd make decisions about the house you inherited without consulting you. The way he'd take credit for things you'd accomplished. I tried to bring it up a few times but you seemed happy so I dropped it. The words hit me like physical blows. She'd seen it. She'd known. And I'd been too blind or too stubborn to listen. I wasn't happy, Maggie, I said softly. I don't think I've been happy in years. I think I've just been busy. Too busy meeting everyone else's needs to notice that none of mine were being met. My phone rang again. This time it was my sister, Margaret. I answered. Claire, thank God. Richard just called me looking for you. He says you left work early and never came home. Are you all right? Maggie, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I need you to answer a question honestly. Do you think I'm a fool? There was a pause. What happened? I told her everything. Every word I'd overheard, every realization, every moment of humiliation. When I finished, I heard her take a deep breath. That son of a bitch, she said quietly. And Jessica, Claire, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, I replied. Just tell me honestly. Have you noticed? Have people been laughing at me? No one's been laughing at you, Claire. You've been a devoted wife and mother. That's not something to laugh at. But, she hesitated. But what? I've always thought Richard was using you. The way he'd talk about our money when you were the one working full-time while he worked part-time at his friend's car dealership. The way he'd make decisions about the house you inherited without consulting you. I tried to bring it up a few times but you seemed happy so I dropped it. Happy? Had I been happy? Or had I just been too busy being useful to notice I wasn't happy? Maggie, I need your help with something, I said. But it's going to sound crazy. After what you just told me, nothing sounds crazy anymore. What do you need? I need you to help me plan a real wedding. But Richard and Jessica can't know about it. I could hear the smile in her voice when she responded. I'm listening. Over the next 3 weeks, Margaret and I worked in secret. I continued to play the role of the obsessive mother of the bride, showing up to the fake venue appointments Richard had scheduled, discussing centerpieces that would never exist, and tasting cakes that would never be ordered. All the while, Margaret and I were planning something entirely different. Playing the role was harder than I'd expected. Every time I sat across from Richard at dinner, smiling and discussing the wedding timeline, I wanted to scream. Every time Jessica called me with another update about how she'd decided on something, when I knew she'd already made all these decisions weeks ago without me, I wanted to hang up and never speak to her again. But I didn't. I played my part perfectly. I was cheerful, accommodating Claire, always ready with a smile and a helpful suggestion. I made myself smaller and smaller just as I'd been doing for 30 years, and I watched them become more comfortable, more confident in their deception. I started with the money. I went to the bank and discovered that Richard had indeed been moving my contributions to a separate account. In total, he had diverted $25,000 of my money. The account was in both our names technically, but I'd never known it existed. I contacted a lawyer who advised me that since it was technically a joint account, it was complicated but not impossible to address. We started building a case. The lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chin, was recommended by Margaret. She was in her 40s, professional and sharp, and she didn't judge me when I told her my story. Instead, she got angry on my behalf. Mrs. Morrison, she said, what your husband has done is called financial abuse. It's a form of domestic abuse that doesn't leave physical marks, but it's just as damaging. You've been working and earning money that he's been systematically stealing from you while making you believe it was being spent on legitimate family expenses. Hearing it described that way in those clinical terms made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I wasn't just a foolish wife who'd been tricked. I was a victim of abuse. The word felt strange in my mouth when I said it out loud for the first time. I'm a victim of financial abuse. But that wasn't enough. I wanted justice that Richard and Jessica could feel, not just financially but in their souls. Over the next 3 weeks, Margaret and I worked in secret. I continued to play the role of the obsessive mother of the bride, showing up to the fake venue appointments Richard had scheduled, discussing centerpieces that would never exist, and tasting cakes that would never be ordered. All the while, Margaret and I were planning something entirely different. I started with the money. I went to the bank and discovered that Richard had indeed been moving my contributions to a separate account. In total, he had diverted $25,000 of my money. I contacted a lawyer who advised me that since it was technically a joint account, it was complicated but not impossible to address. We started building a case, but that wasn't enough. I wanted justice that Richard and Jessica could feel, not just financially but in their souls. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sandra Thompson who came highly recommended by my lawyer. I wanted to know exactly what Richard was doing with the wedding money and what else he might be hiding. Sandra was thorough. Within a week, she had traced the money to not just a boat fund but also to an account belonging to a woman named Patricia Mitchell. Sandra presented her findings to me in Margaret's dining room, laying out photographs and bank statements like a detective in a crime movie. There was a professionalism to her that I appreciated. She didn't sensationalize the information or try to spare my feelings. She just presented the facts. The boat purchases started about 4 months ago, Sandra explained, pointing to the statements. He's bought a used motorboat for $8,000. He keeps it at a marina about 40 minutes from here, under his friend Mike's name. Mike Wilson, who owns the car dealership where he works. So even the boat was hidden. Even that he couldn't do honestly. And Patricia Mitchell? I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt. Patricia Mitchell is 32 years old, works at the same car dealership as your husband. She's been receiving regular payments from him for the past 8 months. Sandra laid out the evidence. Hotel reservations, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases. It appears to be a serious relationship, not just a casual affair. 8 months. They'd been together for 8 months. I tried to remember what had been happening in my life 8 months ago. It had been October. Jessica had just gotten engaged. I'd been so happy, so excited about planning the wedding. Had Richard been with Patricia when I'd come home that day, breathless with excitement, wanting to share the good news? Had he been thinking about her while I chattered about color schemes and guest lists? There's more, Sandra said gently. I followed them for 3 days. They have a routine. Wednesday afternoons he tells you he's working late, but he's actually meeting her. They go to a hotel in the next town. Sometimes they meet for lunch on Saturdays when you're working at the library. He's told her he's divorced, by the way. I laughed at that, a bitter sound. Of course he has. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison, Sandra said. I know this is painful. Don't apologize for telling me the truth, I replied. The truth is the only thing that's going to set me free. Patricia Mitchell was 32 years old, worked at the same car dealership as Richard, and according to the transaction records, had been receiving regular payments from my husband for the past 8 months. Hotel reservations, restaurant bills, jewelry purchases. My husband wasn't just stealing from me. He was stealing from me to fund an affair. When Sandra showed me the evidence, I felt strangely calm. It was as if every piece of the puzzle was falling into place, revealing a picture I should have seen years ago. What do you want to do with this information? Sandra asked. I want to make sure that at my daughter's wedding, everyone sees who Richard Morrison really is, I replied. The wedding was set for June 15th, a Saturday. What Jessica and Richard didn't know was that I had been in contact with the real venue, the one they'd actually booked. I'd introduced myself to the wedding coordinator as the mother of the bride and explained that I wanted to contribute to making the day special. She was delighted to work with me. I arranged for a special surprise during the reception. A video presentation, I told her. A tribute to the happy couple and their families. He thought it was a beautiful idea. Meanwhile, I continued my double life. I showed up to the fake cake tasting and gushed over flavors for a cake that would never be made. I addressed invitations to a venue that didn't exist and mailed them to the 100 guests that Richard and Jessica planned to redirect at the last minute. I played my part perfectly. The cake tasting was particularly surreal. Jessica, Richard, and I sat at a bakery called Sweet Beginnings, sampling tiny squares of cake while the owner, a cheerful woman named Denise, explained the differences between buttercream and fondant. Jessica barely looked at me the entire time, directing all her comments to Richard as if I wasn't there. What do you think of the lemon, Dad? She'd ask, ignoring that I was sitting right next to her. I think your mother might prefer the vanilla, Richard would reply, in that patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. They were so comfortable in their lie that they didn't even bother to hide their alliance from me. I was just the person holding the checkbook, someone to be managed and manipulated but not respected. I smiled and nodded and wrote down notes about cake flavors that would never be ordered. Denise kept looking at me with slight concern, as if she could sense something was wrong, but she said nothing. It wasn't her business if a family was falling apart over wedding cake samples. But I also did something else. I contacted every single one of those 100 guests personally. I called them, visited them, sent them private messages. I told them there had been a mistake with the invitation address and provided them with the real venue. I explained that there had been some family confusion about the planning, and I wanted to make sure they all knew where to go. The conversations were enlightening. Many of them had already sensed something was wrong. Claire, is everything okay? My friend Sarah from book club had asked when I visited her. You've seemed stressed lately and Jessica hasn't been returning my calls. Everything will be okay soon, I told her. I just need you to trust me and show up to this address on June 15th. Can you do that? Of course, she'd said, squeezing my hand. Whatever you need. One by one I secured commitments. My colleagues from the library who'd known me for 15 years. My college roommates who'd made the trip from 3 different states. Even Mrs. Henderson, my supervisor, who said she'd be honored to attend. I was rebuilding my community, reaching out to people I'd neglected while I'd been so focused on being the perfect wife and mother. Not a single person turned down my invitation. In fact, many of them were confused about the official change of venue notice they'd supposedly receive. I assured them to ignore any last-minute changes and just show up to the address I'd given them. Meanwhile, I continued my double life. I showed up to the fake cake tasting and gushed over flavors for a cake that would never be made. I addressed invitations to a venue that didn't exist and mailed them to the 100 guests that Richard and Jessica planned to redirect at the last minute. I played my part perfectly, but I also did something else. I contacted every single one of those 100 guests personally. I called them, visited them, sent them private messages. I told them there had been a mistake with the invitation address and provided them with the real venue. I explained that there had been some family confusion about the planning, and I wanted to make sure they all knew where to go. Not a single person turned down my invitation. In fact, many of them were confused about the official change of venue notice they'd supposedly receive. I assured them to ignore any last-minute changes and just show up to the address I'd given them. I also sent a special invitation to Patricia Mitchell. I found her address through Sandra's investigation and sent it anonymously with a note that said, "Richard would love to see you there." The week before the wedding, Richard sat me down for what he clearly thought would be a gentle letdown. It was a Tuesday evening and I'd just finished making dinner. Meatloaf, Richard's favorite, though he rarely thanked me for it. I'd set the table, poured him a glass of wine and sat down across from him, waiting. "Claire, honey, I need to talk to you about the wedding." The word, honey, always sounded wrong coming from him, like he was reading from a script of how husbands were supposed to talk. In 30 years of marriage, he'd never called me that spontaneously, only when he wanted something or was trying to manipulate me. I looked up from my magazine, the picture of innocent attention. "What about it?" He took a sip of wine, gathering his courage. I could see him preparing his speech, the one he'd probably practiced with Jessica. "Well, Jessica and I have been talking and we think maybe we went a bit overboard with the planning. You know, with your ideas and everything." "My ideas?" I kept my voice light, curious. Inside, I was burning with anger, but I kept my face neutral. This was a performance, and I'd become very good at performing over the past few weeks. "The thing is, honey, this is Jessica's day and she wants something more modern, more her style. So we've made a few changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked, though I already knew. I'd known for weeks, but I wanted to hear him say it, wanted to watch him lie to my face one more time. "Well, we've changed the venue, and the guest list, and well, pretty much everything. But don't worry, we kept the parts you'll care about. You'll still be there, of course, and you can still wear that dress you bought." The week before the wedding, Richard sat me down for what he clearly thought would be a gentle letdown. "Claire, honey, I need to talk to you about the wedding." I looked up from my magazine, the picture of innocent attention. "What about it?" "Well, Jessica and I have been talking and we think maybe we went a bit overboard with the planning. You know, with your ideas and everything." "My ideas?" I kept my voice light, curious. "The thing is, honey, this is Jessica's day and she wants something more modern, more her style. So we've made a few changes." "What kind of changes?" "Well, we've changed the venue, and the guest list, and well, pretty much everything. But don't worry, we kept the parts you'll care about. You'll still be there, of course, and you can still wear that dress you bought." The dress I'd bought was a beautiful lilac gown that cost $800. I wondered if he knew about that expense or if he'd been too busy skimming wedding funds to notice. "I see," I said slowly. "So when were you planning to tell me about these changes?" "That's what I'm doing now. The new venue is much smaller, more intimate. We're only having about 50 guests instead of 100. Jessica just wants her close friends and immediate family. And my friends from book club, the ones who've known Jessica since she was a baby." Richard had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "Well, we thought it might be too much. You understand?" I nodded slowly. "I understand perfectly." He seemed relieved. "Great. I knew you'd be reasonable about this. You're a wonderful mother, Claire. So understanding." I smiled at him. "Oh, Richard, you have no idea. The night before the wedding I barely slept. I went over every detail in my mind, checking and rechecking that everything was in place. Margaret called me at midnight. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. "It's not too late to back out." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early and got ready at Margaret's house. I put on my lilac dress, did my makeup and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked good, better than I had in years. There was something different in my eyes, something that looked like strength. Jessica called me around noon. Mom, where are you? Dad says you left early this morning. I'm at Aunt Margaret's. I wanted to get ready here so I wouldn't be in your way. Oh, well, the wedding's at 4. Don't be late. I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. I arrived at the venue at 3:30, exactly as planned. The real venue, the one Jessica and Richard had actually booked. It was a beautiful garden setting with white chairs arranged in rows facing a flower-covered arch, pink roses as it happened. Not the vintage kind I had suggested, but pink nonetheless. The irony wasn't lost on me. The June afternoon was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that made the roses sway slightly. It was the kind of weather I'd dreamed about when I first learned Jessica was getting married. I'd imagined standing beside her, adjusting her veil, whispering how beautiful she looked. I'd imagined walking her down the aisle since her father wasn't in the picture, filling that role with pride and love. Now I was here for an entirely different purpose. The venue was called Rosewood Gardens, and it was objectively beautiful. Stone pathways wound through carefully maintained flower beds. A white gazebo stood at one end, decorated with flowing white fabric and those pink roses. Tables were set up for the reception on a stone patio overlooking a small pond. Under different circumstances, I would have been thrilled with this choice. But these weren't different circumstances. The guests were already arriving. I watched from the parking lot, sitting in my car as Jessica's friends filed in, young and beautiful in their cocktail dresses. I recognized some of them from photos Jessica had posted online. Her college roommate, Brittany. Her co-worker from the marketing firm, Rachel. Girls who probably had no idea what kind of person they were celebrating today. Then I watched as Richard's family arrived, his brother and sister-in-law, his elderly parents. His mother was walking slowly, leaning on a cane, and his father held her arm carefully. They were good people, Richard's parents. They'd always been kind to me. I wondered if they knew about Patricia Mitchell. I wondered if they'd be ashamed of their son when they learned the truth. And then I saw the others. My book club friends walking in with confused looks on their faces. Sarah was there wearing the blue dress she'd shown me last week. Martha followed behind her, looking around as if trying to orient herself. My colleagues from the library arrived next. Linda, who worked in the children's section with me. Tom, our head librarian. Even young Amy, the intern who I'd been mentoring. Then my old college roommates. Jennifer had flown in from California. Diane had driven up from North Carolina. Patricia, different Patricia I thought with dark humor, had come from Virginia. They were all here, all of them showing up for me even though I hadn't fully explained why I needed them there. I watched from the parking lot as Richard spotted them. I had binoculars in my bag, something Sandra the private investigator had given me. You'll want to see their reactions, she'd said. He was right. Richard's face went pale when he saw Sarah and Martha walking through the garden gate. He rushed over to the wedding coordinator, a young woman named Ashley who I'd been working with for the past 3 weeks. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could see him gesturing frantically, his face getting redder. His hands were moving in that way they did when he was angry but trying not to show it. Ashley just smiled at him calmly and showed him something on her tablet. The updated guest list, the one I had provided with my generous contribution to the venue costs. I'd paid an extra $3,000 to accommodate the additional guests, money I'd withdrawn from my personal savings account, the one Richard didn't know about, the one my mother had set up for me years ago, telling me to always keep something separate, just in case. She'd known even then that I might need an escape route someday. Richard looked at the tablet, then back at Ashley, then at the growing crowd of guests. I saw him say something else, probably demanding to know who had authorized this. Ashley, bless her, just kept smiling and pointing to her tablet. Everything was above board, everything was paid for, everything was legal. Then I saw her, Patricia Mitchell, walking through the gate in a red dress that was entirely inappropriate for a wedding. It was tight, low-cut, and screaming for attention. She looked around nervously, clutching a small handbag, clearly not sure why she'd been invited but too curious to stay away. Or maybe she was there because she thought Richard wanted her there. Maybe she thought this was his way of making their relationship public, of choosing her over me. She didn't know yet that she was just another pawn in this game. Another person Richard had used for his own purposes. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The guests were already arriving. I watched as Jessica's friends filed in, young and beautiful in their cocktail dresses. Then I watched as Richard's family arrived, his brother and sister-in-law, his elderly parents. And then I saw the others. My book club friends walking in with confused looks on their faces. My colleagues from the library. My old college roommates. The 100 guests that Richard and Jessica had tried to exclude. I watched from the parking lot as Richard spotted them. His face went pale. He rushed over to the wedding coordinator, gesturing frantically. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could imagine. There's been a mistake. These people weren't invited. But the coordinator just smiled and showed him the updated guest list, the one I had provided with my generous contribution to the venue costs. Then I saw her, Patricia Mitchell, walking in wearing a red dress that was entirely inappropriate for a wedding. She looked around nervously, clearly not sure why she'd been invited but too curious to stay away. I waited until 3:55, 5 minutes before the ceremony was supposed to start. Then I walked into the venue. The reaction was immediate. Jessica, stunning in her simple white dress, saw me and her face went from radiant bride to panicked daughter in seconds. Richard, standing near the front in his tuxedo, looked like he'd seen a ghost. I walked down the aisle slowly, greeting guests left and right. "Hello, Martha. So glad you could make it. Robert, thank you for coming. Susan, you look beautiful." I made my way to the front row, the seat traditionally reserved for the mother of the bride. Richard intercepted me. "Claire, what are all these people doing here?" he hissed. "We sent them different venue information." "Did you?" I asked innocently. "How strange. They all seem to know exactly where to come." Before he could respond, the music started. Jessica had no choice but to begin walking down the aisle on the arm of her uncle, Richard's brother. We'd decided years ago that Richard would wait at the altar since he was also hosting, a decision I now recognized as more evidence of his ego. The ceremony was beautiful despite the tension. Jessica and her fiancé Michael, a nice young man who I genuinely liked and felt sorry for, exchanged vows. I watched my daughter promise to love and honor her future husband, and I wondered if she had any concept of what those words meant. She'd certainly never seen a good example of it in her own home. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the reception area. This was where my real plan would unfold. The reception area was set up beautifully. Round tables covered in white linens, each with a centerpiece of mixed flowers. Not pink roses, I noticed. Jessica had chosen white and purple flowers instead. The tables were arranged around a central dance floor, and at one end was a small stage where the DJ had set up his equipment. Behind the DJ booth was a large screen for video presentations. Dinner was served, toasts were made. Richard kept trying to catch my eye, clearly wanting to talk, but I avoided him. I was waiting for the right moment. I sat at a table with Margaret and my college roommates, eating prime rib that I barely tasted, drinking wine that might as well have been water for all I noticed it. I was too focused on what was coming. The best man's toast was predictable. Michael's college friend talked about what a great guy Michael was, how lucky Jessica was to have found him. If only he knew. The maid of honor's toast was more emotional. Brittany, Jessica's college roommate, talked about how Jessica had always known what she wanted and gone after it. "She doesn't let anything stand in her way," Brittany said, raising her glass. I almost laughed at that. No, Jessica certainly didn't let anything stand in her way, including basic human decency. I watched Jessica during the toasts. She was radiant in her simple white dress. Her hair was styled in loose waves, her makeup was perfect. She looked happy, genuinely happy, and for a moment I felt a pang of something like regret. This was still my daughter. I had still raised her, loved her, sacrificed for her. Was I really about to destroy her wedding day? Then I remembered their laughter. I remembered Richard saying, "Keep her busy with the fake plans." I remembered Jessica calling my ideas horrible. I remembered the $25,000 they'd stolen from me. I remembered Patricia Mitchell and the hotel receipts. The regret faded, replaced by cold determination. That moment came after the father-daughter dance. As Richard and Jessica left the dance floor, the DJ made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special surprise for the bride and groom. The mother of the bride has prepared a video presentation." The DJ's voice was cheerful, unsuspecting. I'd paid him $200 to make that announcement at exactly this time, after the father-daughter dance but before the cake cutting. Perfect timing for maximum impact. I watched Jessica's face go white. He knew. In that instant she knew something was wrong. Richard looked around frantically, trying to find me in the crowd, but I was already moving toward the front of the room, remote control in hand. "Thank you all so much for coming," I said into the microphone. My voice was steady, clear. I'd practiced this speech 100 times in Margaret's living room. When Jessica and Richard asked me to help plan this wedding, I was thrilled. I wanted everything to be perfect for my little girl's special day. I could see people smiling, expecting a sentimental mother's tribute. Jessica was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, anger, maybe both. Richard had half risen from his seat as if he might try to stop me. Margaret, who had been waiting near the back, moved to stand near him. She didn't touch him, but her presence there, a 6-foot-tall woman with the build of a former college basketball player, made him think twice about approaching me. So I spent 2 years planning every detail. I continued. Every flower, every invitation, every centerpiece. I put my heart into it, and I put my money into it too. $25,000 to be exact. I heard murmurs from the crowd. $25,000. That was a lot of money, and everyone knew I was a librarian. That represented years of savings. I could see people doing the math in their heads, looking at each other with surprised expressions. But what I didn't know, I continued, my voice never wavering, was that while I was planning one wedding, my husband and daughter were planning another. A different wedding with a different guest list, with my money that they diverted to fund not just this wedding, but other purchases as well. Richard stood up completely now. Claire, stop this right now. His voice was commanding, the voice he used when he wanted to intimidate me into silence. It had worked for 30 years. It wasn't going to work anymore. Sit down, Richard, I said calmly. I'm not finished. The room had gone completely silent. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, frozen with serving trays in hand. All eyes were on me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink from that attention. I welcomed it. I want to show everyone a video, I said. Not the sentimental tribute you might have expected, but something I think is important for everyone here to see. Something about truth and consequences, and what happens when you treat the people who love you like they're disposable. I clicked the remote. The screen behind me lit up with the first image. Bank statements showing the transfers from our joint account to Richard's private account. The numbers were clear, enlarged so everyone could read them. $500 here, $1,000 there, sometimes $2,000 at a time. A steady drain of money that I'd earned, money I'd carefully saved, money I'd thought was going toward my daughter's happiness. Then receipts for a boat I'd never seen. A 26-foot motorboat, purchased for $8,000. Registration papers in Mike Wilson's name. Photos of the boat docked at a marina I'd never visited. Richard's secret toy bought with my wedding savings. Then hotel bills for rooms I'd never stayed in. The Grand Hotel charged to our account. The Riverside Inn $250 a night. The Parkview Suites with room service charges and minibar bills. Dates that corresponded with nights when Richard had told me he was working late or had business trips with Mike. Then came the photos. I'd warned Sandra to make them clear but not explicit. I didn't want to traumatize Jessica, despite everything, but they were clear enough. Richard and Patricia Mitchell at restaurants, holding hands across candlelit tables. Richard and Patricia Mitchell walking into a hotel together, his hand on the small of her back. Richard and Patricia Mitchell kissing in a parking lot, their bodies pressed together in a way that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The gasps from the crowd were audible. I heard someone say, "Oh my God." I saw Richard's mother put her hand over her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Jessica stood frozen, staring at the screen in horror, her beautiful face contorted with an expression of betrayal that probably mirrored my own from 3 weeks ago. "This is Patricia Mitchell," I said as a clear photo of her appeared on the screen. Professional headshot quality, probably from the car dealership's website. Young, pretty, smiling. Richard has been seeing her for 8 months. He's been using my wedding savings to pay for their relationship. And she's here today actually. "Patricia, would you stand up?" Every head in the room turned to look at the woman in the red dress. She was already crying, mascara running down her face in black streaks. She looked around wildly like a trapped animal. She didn't stand. Instead, she ran from the room, her high heels clicking frantically against the stone patio as she fled. The final image appeared on the screen. It was the audio recording I'd made, visualized as a waveform with subtitles. I debated whether to include this, whether it was too cruel. But in the end, I decided that the truth, no matter how painful, was necessary. Their voices filled the room, amplified by the DJ's sound system. Crystal clear, unmistakable. Jessica's voice. "Mom is going to lose her mind when she finds out." Richard's voice. "She'll get over it. This is your wedding, not hers." Jessica again. "I'm sick of her showing up to every appointment with those horrible ideas." Richard. "We keep her busy with the fake plans while we finalize everything else." Jessica. "She's been putting aside money from her salary for months." Richard laughing. "Your mother doesn't check the statements. I've been moving the wedding money into a separate account." The recording went on. Their plans to redirect guests, their contempt for my ideas, their discussion of how to spend the difference between what I thought the wedding cost and what it actually cost. Every word, every laugh, every casual cruelty preserved and now broadcast to everyone they knew. When it ended, the silence was deafening. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was someone sobbing quietly, and I realized it was Richard's mother. After the ceremony, everyone moved to the reception area. This was where my real plan would unfold. Dinner was served, toasts were made. Richard kept trying to catch my eye, clearly wanting to talk, but I avoided him. I was waiting for the right moment. That moment came after the father-daughter dance. As Richard and Jessica left the dance floor, the DJ made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special surprise for the bride and groom. The mother of the bride has prepared a video presentation." I watched Jessica's face go white. Richard looked around frantically, trying to find me in the crowd, but I was already moving toward the front of the room, remote control in hand. "Thank you all so much for coming," I said into the microphone. When Jessica and Richard asked me to help plan this wedding, I was thrilled. I wanted everything to be perfect for my little girl's special day. Jessica was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, anger, maybe both. So I spent 2 years planning every detail. Every flower, every invitation, every centerpiece. I put my heart into it, and I put my money into it too. $25,000 to be exact. I heard murmurs from the crowd. That was a lot of money, and everyone knew I was a librarian. That represented years of savings. But what I didn't know, I continued, was that while I was planning one wedding, my husband and daughter were planning another. A different wedding with a different guest list, with my money that they diverted to fund not just this wedding, but other purchases as well. Richard stood up. "Claire, stop this right now." "Sit down, Richard," I said calmly. "I'm not finished." Margaret, who had been waiting near the back, moved to stand beside Richard. She didn't touch him, but her presence there, a 6-foot-tall woman with the build of a former college basketball player, made him think twice about approaching me. "I want to show everyone a video," I said. "Not the sentimental tribute you might have expected, but something I think is important for everyone here to see." I clicked the remote. The screen behind me lit up with the first image. Bank statements showing the transfers from our joint account to Richard's private account. Then receipts for a boat I'd never seen. Then hotel bills for rooms I'd never stayed in. Then came the photos. Richard and Patricia Mitchell at restaurants, holding hands. Richard and Patricia Mitchell going into a hotel together. Richard and Patricia Mitchell kissing in a parking lot. The gasps from the crowd were audible. I saw Richard's mother put her hand over her mouth. Jessica stood frozen, staring at the screen in horror. "This is Patricia Mitchell," I said as a clear photo of her appeared on the screen. "Richard has been seeing her for 8 months. He's been using my wedding savings to pay for their relationship. And she's here today actually. Patricia, would you stand up?" Every head in the room turned to look at the woman in the red dress. She was already crying, mascara running down her face. She didn't stand. Instead, she ran from the room. The final image appeared on the screen. It was a recording of the conversation I'd overheard, the one from that rainy Tuesday. I'd gone back to the house with my phone on voice record and recreated the scene, asking Richard and Jessica to repeat their conversation while I pretended to be out. They'd been so comfortable with their deception that they'd obliged without hesitation. Their voices filled the room. Jessica laughing about my horrible ideas. Richard discussing how he'd been stealing money. Their plan to redirect the guest. Their contempt for me and everything I'd done. When it ended, the silence was deafening. I turned off the screen and looked at my daughter. She was crying, her perfect makeup running in black streaks. Michael stood beside her, looking between her and me with an expression of complete confusion. "Jessica," I said softly, "I loved you from the moment you were born. I gave you everything I had. My time, my energy, my money, my heart. And this is what you thought of me." "Mom, she started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. Michael, you seem like a good man, and I'm sorry you're caught up in this. Jessica, I hope you'll learn from this. I hope you'll learn that the people who love you deserve your respect. That kindness isn't weakness. That your parents aren't just ATMs and party planners." I turned to Richard. "As for you, I want you to know that I've filed for divorce. My lawyer will contact you on Monday. The house that you've been living in, the one that belonged to my parents and that I foolishly put in both our names, will be sold and I will receive my fair share. The money you stole from me will be repaid one way or another." Richard found his voice. "You can't do this. You can't destroy our family like this." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me. "I'm not destroying our family, Richard. I'm just revealing what it's always been. You did that yourself." I turned back to the crowd, to the 100 guests who Richard and Jessica had tried to exclude, who were now witnessing this spectacular implosion. "I want to thank you all for coming. Please stay and enjoy the reception. The food is wonderful and it's all paid for. Well, mostly by me, but that's nothing new." A few people laughed nervously. "As for me, I'm leaving. I have a life to rebuild." I walked toward the exit, my head held high. As I reached the door, I heard my sister's voice. "Wait for me, Claire." Margaret jogged after me and we walked to the parking lot together. Behind us, I could hear the chaos erupting. Raised voices, crying, confusion. But I didn't look back. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked as we reached my car. "Free," I said. "For the first time in 30 years I feel completely free." We drove to Margaret's house, where I'd been staying for the past 2 weeks without Richard's knowledge. I changed out of my lilac dress and into comfortable jeans and a sweater. Then Margaret and I ordered pizza and watched old movies until dawn. The next morning, my phone had 47 missed calls and 83 text messages. Most were from Richard, ranging from angry to pleading. A few were from Jessica, all of them angry. There were also messages from wedding guests, most of them supportive. My friend Sarah from book club wrote, "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I'm so proud of you." One message stood out. It was from Michael, Jessica's new husband. "Mrs. Morrison, I don't know what to say. I had no idea about any of this. I think Jessica and I have a lot to talk about. Thank you for showing me who I married before it was too late. I hope you'll let me stay in touch." I responded, "Michael, you're a good man. Whatever you decide to do, I wish you well. You'll always be welcome in my life." Over the next few months, my life changed completely. The divorce was messy, but my lawyer was excellent. We proved that Richard had stolen from me, and I was awarded the full value of my parents' house plus repayment of the diverted wedding funds. Richard fought it every step of the way, but the evidence was irrefutable. Jessica called me 3 times. The first time she was angry, blaming me for ruining her wedding and destroying our family. I told her calmly that I had ruined nothing, that I had simply revealed the truth. The second time she was sad, asking if we could just forget all of this and move on. I told her that forgetting was impossible and that moving on would take time and significant effort on her part. The third time she was different, quieter. She told me that Michael had left her, that he'd said he couldn't trust her after what he'd seen. He said she was sorry. "Are you sorry for what you did?" I asked. "Or sorry for the consequences?" She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know, Mom. Maybe both. When you figure out which one it is, call me again," I said. "Until then, I need space." That was 6 months ago. She hasn't called back yet. Maybe she will someday. Maybe she won't. I've learned that I can't control other people, only myself. I sold the house and bought a small condo near the beach. I quit my part-time library job and started working full-time at a nonprofit that helps women rebuild their lives after divorce. I use my story as a cautionary tale and as inspiration. If I could find the strength to walk away after 30 years, anyone can. Margaret and I take trips together now, something we never had time for when I was busy being the perfect wife and mother. Last month we went to Ireland. Next month we're going to Japan. I've also started dating, which feels strange at 58 but also exciting. There's a man named Thomas who volunteers at the nonprofit with me. He's kind and funny and treats me like I matter. We're taking things slowly, but for the first time in decades, I feel like I'm building something based on mutual respect rather than need or obligation. Sometimes I think about that rainy Tuesday afternoon when I stood in my hallway and overheard the truth. Sometimes I wish I hadn't heard it, that I could have gone on living in blissful ignorance. But most of the time I'm grateful. That moment of pain gave me back my life. I learned that love without respect is worthless. I learned that generosity without boundaries is just enabling. I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value you, even when those people are your own family. My name is Claire Morrison. I'm 58 years old, and I'm finally living the life I deserve. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, who feels invisible in their own life, who gives and gives without receiving anything in return, I want you to know something. You deserve better. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to be respected. And it's never too late to demand it. The people who truly love you will rise to meet that standard. The people who don't will reveal themselves, just as Richard and Jessica revealed themselves to me. And when they do, you'll have a choice. You can continue to diminish yourself to accommodate their selfishness, or you can choose yourself. I chose myself. It was the hardest decision I ever made and the best decision I ever made. Some bridges are meant to burn. Some relationships are meant to end. Some chapters need to close so new ones can begin. I'm still writing my story, but now I'm the author, not just a supporting character in someone else's narrative. And that makes all the difference.